My dad kicked me out of my own room to please my pregnant sister, not knowing I bought the house and just evicted them all. Hey Reddit, it's Dave here, long-time lurker, first-time poster. I never thought I'd actually post anything on here, but life's been crazy lately, and I need a sanity check or at least a place to vent. So, here's the deal. I'm 30 years old, single, and a software engineer. Pretty standard stuff, right? A couple of years ago, I bought this house in Westfield, nothing fancy, just a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in a decent neighborhood. I work remotely most of the time, so being in the city made sense. Plus, the plan was for my parents, Nancy, 56, and Ron, 58, to move in with me after they retired. I figured it'd be a win-win. They'd get to live in a nice house, and have me around to help out, and I'd get to spend more time with them. They'd raised me in a small rural town, working as teachers, and I wanted to give them something better for their golden years. Now let me clarify. I'm not some guy living in his parents' basement. This house, it's mine. I pay the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries, and pretty much everything else. My parents don't pay a dime, and I'm fine with that. They spent their lives taking care of me, so I figured it's only fair to return the favor now that they're older. At first, things were great. My parents seemed happy settling into their new routines. Mom was all about decorating the house and starting a little garden out back. Dad rediscovered his love of crossword puzzles and old Western movies. I worked from my home office, and in the evenings we'd have dinner together like one big happy family. Honestly, it felt good. I liked having them around. But then, things started to shift. It wasn't anything dramatic at first, just small stuff. Mom would make these comments about how quiet the house was during the day, or how she missed having a full house like we did when I was a kid. I thought she was just reminiscing, so I didn't think much of it. But looking back, I should have seen the writing on the wall. One morning over breakfast, Mom casually mentioned that my sister Jenna, 32, and her husband, Mark, 33, were thinking about moving to Westfield. Jenna, for context, has always been the family's wild card. She's the older sibling who could never quite get her life together. Mark? Well, he's Mark. Kind of a whatever happens kind of guy. They've been married for 5 years, and during that time they've bounced between jobs, apartments, and crises like it's some kind of sport. Anyway, Mom said they were struggling back in Fairview, their small town a couple of hours away. Jenna had just found out she was pregnant, and things weren't going great financially, again. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured they'd move to Westfield, rent an apartment, and we'd all help out when the baby came. That's what families do, right? But a few days later, Mom made her own decision. Jenna and Mark weren't just moving to Westfield, they were moving in with us. She said it like it was already a done deal. Just until they get on their feet, she added, like that made it okay. I didn't say anything at first. What could I say? No, your pregnant daughter can't move in? That's not exactly a good look. Plus, I wanted to be supportive. Jenna's my sister, and if she needed help, I wanted to help. But I also had questions. How long was just until they get on their feet? Were they planning to contribute financially? What was the actual plan? Mom didn't have answers. She just said, "It'll be fine, Dave. They won't be any trouble." Guess what? They were the trouble. A few days after Mom casually dropped the news about Jenna and Mark moving in, I came home from running some errands, and they were already there. I mean, not like, oh, they popped by to check out the place. There they were with their suitcases, boxes, and even a freaking crib. I walked in, and it was like I'd missed a major memo. Mom was helping Jenna unpack in the guest room while Dad and Mark were in the garage moving stuff around. I just stood in the hallway for a solid minute trying to process the scene. Eventually, I cleared my throat and asked, so this is happening now? Mom turned around all cheerful and said, "Oh, I thought Jenna told you. They figured it'd be easier to come now before she gets too far along in the pregnancy." Right, because why not make life easier for everyone but me? I didn't want to cause a scene, so I kept it civil. I just nodded and said something like, "All right. Let's figure out how this is going to work." I was already trying to mentally rearrange things in my head, figuring out how to make room for 2 extra people, soon to be 3, in the house without losing my mind. That night, after dinner, we all sat down in the living room to talk logistics, or at least, that's what I thought we were going to do. Instead, it turned into this weird mix of small talk and Jenna and Mark gushing about their plans for the baby. "We're thinking of naming her Lily if it's a girl," Jenna said, beaming, "or maybe Caleb if it's a boy." I get it, they were excited. But I kept waiting for the part where we talked about the practical stuff, like how long they were planning to stay, if they'd be contributing to groceries or utilities, and what their timeline was for finding their own place. Finally, I had to bring it up myself. So, I started, trying to sound as neutral as possible. "Have you guys thought about how long you'll be here? Just so we're all on the same page." Jenna gave me this surprised look, like I just asked her to recite the Constitution or something. "Well, we were hoping to stay until the baby's a few months old," she said, to save up and figure things out. That wasn't exactly what I wanted to hear, but okay. I asked if they had a budget or a plan for finding a place after that. Mark chimed in, saying something about how tough the rental market was, and how they wanted to make sure they found the right fit. Translation: they had no plan. Then came the part that really threw me. Jenna mentioned casually, "Oh, and Mom said we could use the master bedroom, since it's closer to the bathroom and has more space for the crib." I swear I almost choked on my water. "Excuse me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Mom said what?" Mom, who'd been quiet up until this point, decided to jump in. "I just thought it made sense," she said. Like it was the most logical thing in the world. "The guest room is pretty small, and with the baby coming, they'll need more room." I stared at her, then Jenna and Mark, who were both nodding along like this was some brilliant idea. "No," I said flat out. "That's not happening." Jenna's face immediately fell. "But Dave, it's just for a little while," she said, like I was the unreasonable one. "You've got the office and the guest room, it's not like you'll be cramped." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I pay for this house," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "I work here, I sleep here, and I'm not giving up my room, period." That didn't go over well. Jenna started tearing up, which is her go-to move when things don't go her way. Mark just sat there, looking awkward, while Mom tried to play mediator. "Dave, don't be so dramatic," she said. "We're all family, we should be helping each other." "Helping doesn't mean being a doormat," I shot back. "They can stay in the guest room, or they can find somewhere else, but my room is off limits." The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. After a few more minutes of back and forth, I got up and went to my room. I could still hear Jenna sniffling in the living room, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to budge. The next morning, things were awkward, to say the least. Jenna and Mark were acting like I'd personally ruined their lives, and Mom wouldn't even look at me. Dad, to his credit, stayed out of it entirely. He just sat at the kitchen table with his coffee, probably wishing he were anywhere else. I tried to focus on work that day, but it was hard with all the tension in the house. Every time I went to the kitchen for a snack or a drink, Jenna would sigh dramatically or give me these sad puppy dog eyes. Mark, meanwhile, kept making little passive-aggressive comments like, "Man, it must be nice to have an office and a bedroom all to yourself." By the end of the day, I was exhausted, not from work, but from the sheer effort of keeping my cool. I knew this wasn't going to end anytime soon, and I was already dreading what was coming next. So, here's where I am right now. Am I overreacting? Should I suck it up and stay silent to avoid tensions, or do I have the right to be bothered? Tell me, guys, what you think, and I'll keep you updated. Update 1.
Hey guys, it's David.
I came with an update since everything has escalated. Alright, so after the whole master bedroom debacle, things just kept spiraling. Jenna and Mark didn't leave, obviously. They stayed in the guest room, but they made it very clear they weren't happy about it. And by made it clear, I mean they turned passive aggressiveness into an art form. It started with small stuff. Jenna would walk around, sighing loudly, muttering things like, "I just don't know how we're going to make this work with such little space." Or she'd make snarky comments. "When I came out of my room, must be nice to have all that space to yourself," she'd say, like I wasn't the one paying for the roof over their heads. Mark wasn't much better. He'd leave his stuff lying around the living room. Shoes, jackets, even empty coffee mugs. Like he owned the place. And let's not even get started on how much TV he watched. It felt like every time I walked into the room he was parked on the couch, watching some random sports game or one of those crime documentaries. But the real problem started when Jenna decided she needed more space for the baby. The guest room wasn't enough, apparently. One afternoon, I came out of my office to grab a drink and found her moving furniture around in the living room. "What are you doing?" I asked, genuinely confused. She didn't even look up. "Making room for the baby stuff," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. I looked around and saw she'd already brought in a playpen, a bouncer, and a pile of baby clothes. "Jenna," I said, trying to keep my cool, "the living room is not a storage space. You have a whole room for this." She finally stopped what she was doing and gave me this exasperated look. "The guest room is too small, Dave. We need more room. And the living room isn't being used for anything important." "Not being used for anything important? Are you kidding me? It's the main common area of the house." I tried to explain this to her, but she just waved me off and kept rearranging things. I ended up having to physically move the playpen back to their room later that evening, which of course led to another round of sighs and comments about how unreasonable I was being. Meanwhile, Mark had started helping himself to my food. I noticed it one day when I went to make a sandwich and found that the deli meat I just bought was gone. I asked him about it, and he shrugged. "Oh, I thought it was for everyone," he said, like it was no big deal. "It's not," I replied. "If you want something, ask me first." He nodded, but 2 days later, I caught him eating the last of my cereal. At this point, I started keeping my snacks in my room, like a college student trying to avoid a thieving roommate. It was ridiculous. The tension in the house kept building. Mom and Dad weren't much help either. Mom took Jenna's side on everything, constantly saying things like, "She's pregnant, Dave. She needs extra support right now." Dad, as usual, stayed quiet and tried to keep out of it, but even he couldn't completely ignore the drama. Then, the breaking point came one weekend. I decided to take a break from the chaos and meet up with some friends for dinner. When I got back, I found Mark sitting in my office chair, using my computer, my work computer. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying not to lose my temper. "Oh, I needed to check something online, and the laptop we brought is super slow," he said, completely unfazed. "That's my work computer," I said, my voice sharper now. "You can't just use it without asking." Mark looked annoyed, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Relax, man, I wasn't doing anything important." "That's not the point," I snapped. "This is my workspace. My job is on the line if anything happens to that computer." He shrugged and got up, muttering something under his breath about how I was so uptight. I had to spend the next hour checking all my files and changing passwords, just in case he'd done something stupid. By this point, I was done. Completely done. I tried to talk to Mom and Dad about it, but they brushed it off like it wasn't a big deal. "They're just trying to adjust, Dave," Mom said. "You need to be more patient." Patient? I'd been patient for weeks, while they turned my house into their personal crash pad. I told her that things needed to change, or I was going to have to ask them to leave. She didn't take it well. "They're family, Dave," she said, her voice full of disappointment. "You can't just kick them out." I didn't want to kick them out, but I also couldn't keep living like this. I was working 10-hour days, paying all the bills, and coming home to a house full of people who acted like they owned the place. Something had to give. So at this point, things were already unbearable. Jenna and Mark were acting like the house belonged to them. Mom was constantly taking their side, and Dad was just floating through it all, like he was a guest in his own life. I was walking around my own house, feeling like a stranger. But what happened next, that was the tipping point. It was a Saturday morning, and I'd planned to spend it cleaning the house. Between Jenna's baby stuff creeping into every corner and Mark's inability to put anything away, the place was a disaster. I woke up early, grabbed some coffee and started tidying up the kitchen. About half an hour later, I walked into the living room and froze. All my stuff from the master bedroom, my clothes, my bedding, even my laptop, was piled in the middle of the floor. Jenna and Mark were in my room, rearranging furniture. "What the hell is going on?" I asked, my voice louder than I intended. Jenna looked up, completely unfazed. "We're moving in," she said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Mom said it's fine." Mom appeared behind me, holding a stack of towels. "They need the space, Dave," she said, her tone calm but firm. "It's for the baby. You can take the guest room for now." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious?" I asked, looking between Jenna and Mom. "This is my house, my room. You can't just decide to move me out without asking." Jenna rolled her eyes. You're being so selfish, she said, crossing her arms. It's just a room, Dave. You don't need all that space. Mark chimed in from across the room, smirking like this was some kind of joke. Yeah, man, we'll take good care of it. That was it, I snapped. Get out of my room, I said, my voice shaking with anger. Right now, both of you. Jenna looked shocked. Excuse me? She said, her voice dripping with indignation. You can't just throw us out. We're family. I don't care if we're family, I said, my voice rising. This is my house, my room. You don't get to just take it because you feel like it. Mom tried to step in, saying something about how I needed to think about the baby, but I cut her off. No, Mom, I'm done. I've been more than patient, but this is crossing the line. If they can't respect my boundaries, they can find somewhere else to live. That's when Jenna started crying. Not subtle, teary-eyed crying, full-on sobbing. I can't believe you're doing this to me, she wailed. I'm pregnant, Dave, pregnant, and you're kicking us out. Mark, of course, jumped to her defense. You're really going to throw out your sister and your niece or nephew? He said, glaring at me. What kind of person does that? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. I'm not throwing you out, I said as calmly as I could. But you're not taking my room either. You stay in the guest room and follow some basic rules. Or you can leave. Those are your options. The argument went on for what felt like forever. Jenna kept crying, Mark kept trying to guilt-trip me, and Mom kept insisting I was being unreasonable. Dad finally spoke up, but only to say, maybe we should all take a step back and cool off. Thanks for the groundbreaking insight, Dad. Eventually I walked out. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys, got in my car, and drove to a nearby park. I sat there for an hour, just staring at the trees and trying to figure out what to do. I didn't want to be the guy who kicked his pregnant sister out, but I also couldn't keep living like this. Something had to give. When I got back, Jenna and Mark were still in the master bedroom, and my stuff was still in the living room. I didn't say a word to them. Instead, I went to my office, printed out 2 eviction notices, and handed them to Jenna and my parents. You have 30 days to figure things out, I said, my voice cold. If you're not out by then, I'll start the legal process. Jenna looked at the paper like it was a death sentence. You're seriously doing this? She asked. Yes, I said. I've had enough. Mom tried to argue, but I held up my hand. No more, I said firmly. You can stay here, Mom and Dad, as long as you respect my boundaries. But Jenna and Mark need to go. I'm done being walked all over. The rest of the evening was tense, to say the least. Jenna and Mark packed up most of their things and left the next day, though they made sure to let me know how heartless I was on their way out. Mom barely spoke to me for a week, and Dad just kept his head down like always. There's been this weird tension hanging in the air, like everyone's just waiting for the next move. Part of me wants to let it all settle, but another part knows I might have to step up and deal with more fallout sooner than I'd like. I don't know what's coming next. I'll be back to update. Final update. Hey, it's David again. I didn't think I'd be back so soon, but here we are. Life's funny like that, huh? Alright, so Jenna and Mark leaving should have been the end of it, right? Wrong. Turns out, evicting family isn't as simple as handing them a piece of paper and watching them drive off into the sunset. The fallout hit harder than I expected. After Jenna and Mark packed up and left, thankfully without the baby furniture takeover, they moved into a tiny apartment on the other side of town. The texts and calls started almost immediately. Jenna kept sending long, guilt-trippy messages about how I'd abandoned her in her time of need, and how I was going to regret pushing my niece or nephew out of the family. Mark was no better, occasionally chiming in with passive-aggressive texts like, "Hope you're enjoying all that space while we struggle over here, must be nice." I blocked both of them after a couple of days. I wasn't going to spend my life defending a decision that, frankly, wasn't even unreasonable. But the problem didn't stop there, because now Mom decided to make it her mission to fix things. She started small, dropping little comments here and there about how hard things were for Jenna. "She's having a tough time adjusting, Dave," she'd say during dinner. Mark lost some hours at work, and they're barely scraping by. I'd nod and say something generic like, "That's tough, but I wasn't taking the bait." Then she escalated. One evening I came home from a long day at work. Yes, I still had to go into the office occasionally, and found Mom waiting for me in the living room. She had that look, you know, the one where you just know a talk is coming. I barely had time to set my bag down before she launched into it. "Dave," she started, "I've been thinking, Maybe you could loan Jenna and Mark some money, just to help them get through this rough patch. I stared at her. Loan them money? I repeated, like I hadn't heard her right. She nodded, completely serious. Just a couple thousand, enough to cover their rent for a few months. I couldn't believe it. Mom, I said, I already gave them a place to stay for free, and they tried to take over my entire house. Now you want me to pay for their apartment? They're family, she said, as if that explained everything. They're struggling, and it's our job to support them. I took a deep breath, trying to keep calm. No, I said firmly. They're adults. They need to figure this out on their own. I've done more than enough. That didn't go over well. Mom started crying, not Jenna-style sobbing, but that quiet, disappointed crying that hits you right in the guilt center. I just don't understand why you're being so harsh, she said. You're not like this, Dave. I'm not being harsh, I said, trying to stay patient. I'm setting boundaries. There's a difference. Dad, as usual, stayed silent. He was sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to read the newspaper, but I could feel him trying to disappear into his chair. Thanks for the backup, Dad. After that, things got icy. Mom stopped bringing up Jenna and Mark directly, but she didn't need to. The atmosphere in the house was heavy, like she was holding a grudge against me but didn't want to say it outright. It was exhausting. Then came the turning point. About 2 weeks after the eviction, Jenna showed up unannounced. I was in my office working when I heard the doorbell ring. I didn't think much of it, probably a delivery or a neighbor. But when I opened the door, there she was, holding a baby onesie and looking like she hadn't slept in days. Can we talk? She asked, her voice quiet. I hesitated but eventually let her in. She sat on the couch, clutching the onesie like it was some kind of security blanket. I just don't understand why you're so mad at us, she said after a long pause. Jenna, I'm not mad, I said. I'm frustrated. You and Mark crossed so many lines while you were here, and instead of apologizing or trying to make things right, you doubled down. She started to cry, not the dramatic tears from before, but genuine ones. I didn't mean to make you feel like that, she said. We're so scared, Dave. We don't know how we're going to do this. I remembered all the sleepless nights, the passive-aggressive comments, and the complete lack of respect they'd shown me in my own home. I get that it's hard, I said, keeping my voice steady, but you and Mark need to figure this out together. I can't keep bailing you out. It's not good for you, and it's not fair to me. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I guess I just hoped things would be different, she said softly. Then she stood up and left without another word. That was the last time we talked in person. So, here we are. Jenna and Mark are gone. Mom's still not thrilled with me, and Dad. Things aren't exactly back to normal, but they're as close as they're going to get for now. After Jenna's unannounced visit, there was a bit of an unspoken truce. She stopped texting me, and I didn't reach out either. I think we both knew there was no point in dragging things out. She and Mark have their lives, and I have mine. Still, I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. She's my sister, and no matter how much she frustrates me, I don't like the idea of us being on bad terms. But at the same time, I can't keep sacrificing my own peace of mind to make her happy. As for Mom and Dad, things have been tense. Mom's been distant, but not in an outright hostile way. More like she's disappointed in me but doesn't want to say it out loud. She'll make these little comments during dinner like, Jenna said the baby's kicking a lot lately. I wish we could be there for her more, or it's so hard for young couples these days. They just need a little help, you know. I don't take the bait anymore. I just nod and say something neutral like, that's nice, or, yeah, times are tough. I know she's trying to guilt me into reaching out to Jenna, but I've drawn my line. I told her once that I wasn't going to enable Jenna and Mark's bad decisions anymore. They're grown-ups, and I'm sticking to it. It sucks, but I can't keep being the family ATM or the guy everyone dumps on when things get hard. Dad's been, quiet, neutral, and as conflict avoidant as ever. I tried to get his take on everything once, just to see where he stood. His response? You're all adults. You'll figure it out. Not exactly the deep, insightful wisdom I was hoping for, but hey, that's Dad for you. At least I finally got around to setting up my home office properly. New desk, better chair, even some plants to liven things up. The house feels like mine again, which is honestly a relief. For a while there, it felt like I was living in someone else's chaos. Jenna and Mark seemed to be doing okay, at least from what I've heard through Mom. They're still in their tiny apartment, but Mark picked up some extra shifts at work, and Jenna's been getting ready for the baby. Mom says they're making do, which, coming from her, is probably a polite way of saying they're barely holding it together. I don't feel great about that. But I also know it's not my responsibility to fix it. They have to figure it out for themselves. As for the rest of the family, I've started setting boundaries there too. My cousin Sarah called me a few weeks ago, asking if I could help her out with a loan. Apparently, word got around that Dave's got money, and now everyone thinks I'm their personal bank. I shut that down real quick. Sorry, Sarah, I said. But I'm not in a position to lend money right now. She didn't push, which was a relief, but it made me realize just how much I've let people take advantage of me over the years. So, what's next? Honestly, I don't know. Things with Jenna are still unresolved, and I'm not sure when or if that will change. Part of me wants to reach out, just to clear the air, but another part of me knows that nothing's really going to change until she and Mark learn to take responsibility for their own lives. Maybe one day they'll get there, or maybe they won't. Either way, I can't let their choices dictate my happiness anymore. For now, I'm focusing on me, my career, my house, my life. It feels selfish to say that, but maybe a little selfishness is exactly what I need. I've spent so much time putting everyone else first that I forgot how to take care of myself. Now I'm learning how to do that, one day at a time, and honestly, it feels pretty damn good. Thanks for sticking with me through all this, Reddit. If you've got advice or thoughts, I'm all ears. Otherwise, I guess this is where my story ends for now.